The Regency Grand Ballroom gleamed with crystal chandeliers, casting a golden glow over the elegantly dressed guests. The air buzzed with excitement, glasses clinking in celebration. Tonight was Madeline Brooks' night, a night that marked the pinnacle of everything she had worked for. After years of relentless effort, grueling hours, and proving herself in an industry dominated by men, she had finally done it. She was now senior vice president at one of the most prestigious firms in the country, and with that title came a massive 50% salary increase. It wasn't just a promotion, it was validation, a victory, a testament to her resilience. At the head of the event stood her boss, Jonathan Hayes, a man known for his sharp instincts and leadership. He had insisted on throwing this extravagant celebration in her honor, filling the room with industry elites, executives, and even her family, who, for once, seemed genuinely proud. Madeline stood there, soaking it in. The compliments, the praise, the admiration. And then, her father Gregory Brooks took the microphone. Silence spread through the room as he smiled, the kind of warm, fatherly smile that softened even the hardest hearts. His voice, rich with affection, rang out. "We are beyond proud of our Maddie tonight. She has always been the strong one, the hardworking one, the one who lifts everyone up." The audience nodded, murmured in agreement. And tonight, Gregory continued, "She's proving just how generous she truly is." Madeline's stomach tightened. "She's decided," he went on, his tone filled with pride, "to share her success with her family. From this day forward, she will be supporting her sister, Vanessa, through her difficult times." Applause. Smiles. Approval. Madeline's breath caught in her throat. "What?" The next moment, Vanessa stepped forward, her eyes welling up with perfectly timed tears. "Maddie," she whispered, her voice breaking, loud enough for the entire room to hear. The room fell silent, spellbound by the scene unfolding before them. I don't even know what to say," Vanessa continued, choking on a sob. "I've been struggling for so long, after losing my job, after the divorce. And now, thanks to my sister's kindness, I don't have to worry about how I'll keep a roof over my kids' heads." A few guests gasped. Someone sniffled. Madeline's pulse pounded in her ears. Her hands clenched at her sides. It was a setup. Her father had just promised her money, her hard-earned salary, without even asking her. And now, with Vanessa playing the tragic single mother, the entire room had already decided. Madeline Brooks was a hero. She had two choices. Say yes, let them rob her blind, and be praised for it. Or say no, and become the villain of her own celebration. She felt their eyes on her. Judging, expecting, pressuring. Her father smiled at her, waiting. Vanessa trembled beside him, playing her role to perfection. Her mother dabbed at fake tears with a napkin. Even Jonathan Hayes, her boss, looked moved. The weight of it all crashed down on her. For a moment, just a split second, she felt the old reflex kick in. The one that had kept her shackled for years. The guilt, the responsibility, the feeling that she owed them everything just because they were family. And then, something shifted. No, not this time. She had spent her entire life being the responsible one. The one who cleaned up their messes. The one who sacrificed. The one who bled for them while they took and took and took. Not anymore. A cold, sharp anger settled inside her, steady, unshakable. Madeline took a slow breath, lifted her chin, and in a voice that was calm, unyielding, and final, she said, "I never agreed to that." The room froze. For a moment, the ballroom was silent. The kind of silence that doesn't just fall over a room, it crashes down like a wave, sweeping everything in its path. Every eye was on Madeline Brooks, waiting for the moment she would smile, laugh it off, correct herself. But she didn't. Her father, Gregory, was the first to break the tension. His smile wavered, but he recovered quickly, letting out a light-hearted chuckle as if she had just made a small, silly mistake. "Oh, honey," he said smoothly, "I know this is all overwhelming, but don't be modest. You told me yourself how much you wanted to help family now that you've made it. Madeline's jaw tightened. Lies. He was so good at them. Her mother, Diane, pressed a trembling hand to her chest, already playing the concerned, heartbroken mother. Maddie, sweetheart, we're just so touched by your kindness. We know how much family means to you. And then came Vanessa, stepping into the spotlight like a seasoned actress. You're really going to take it back, she whispered, her voice soft, broken. Madeline turned to face her sister fully. Vanessa's eyes were wide, shimmering with unshed tears, her expression one of pure betrayal. You know I wouldn't ask if I wasn't desperate, she continued, voice cracking just enough to make sure the audience heard. I thought I could count on you. It was a performance, every bit of it scripted. And the crowd was eating it up. Madeline saw it in the way people shifted uncomfortably, the exchanged glances, the quiet murmurs of sympathy. She could feel the pressure closing in, the weight of judgment pressing down like a vice. She glanced toward her boss, Jonathan Hayes. His face was unreadable, but she knew what he was thinking. This was bad. The optics were bad. The last thing any corporate executive wanted was an employee who looked heartless in front of an audience of industry elites. And her family knew that. They had planned this perfectly. Trap her in a situation where she had no way out. If she agreed, she'd be shackled to their demands forever. If she refused, she'd be branded as selfish, cold, an ungrateful daughter who turned her back on her own blood the second she found success. Gregory sighed deeply, shaking his head in disappointment. I don't understand, he muttered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. She was raised better than this. A calculated move. A slow, poisonous drip of guilt. Diane gasped suddenly, swaying as if she were about to collapse. A nearby guest caught her arm just in time. Oh my God, Mom! Vanessa cried out, rushing to steady her. This is too much for her. Maddie, do you see what you're doing? Madeline clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. They weren't just trying to manipulate her. They were trying to humiliate her. She felt something deep inside her snap. I am not responsible for Vanessa's life, she said, her voice sharp and clear. And I am not responsible for whatever guilt trip you're trying to pull. The gasps were louder this time. Gregory's expression turned cold. So that's it then? His voice was no longer warm, no longer fatherly. It was hard, edged with resentment. You get a taste of success, and suddenly, you think you're better than your own family? Madeline barely had time to respond before Vanessa let out a harsh, broken sob. You don't care about me, she choked out, eyes now full of fury instead of pain. You never have. You always thought you were better than me, didn't you? Just because I made mistakes. She was raising her voice now, making sure everyone heard. People were whispering. This was escalating fast. Madeline turned back to Jonathan. He wasn't saying anything, but she could see the tension in his expression. This wasn't just a scene anymore. It was turning into a spectacle. She needed to end this. I will not be manipulated, she said calmly. Not tonight, not ever again. Vanessa's entire demeanor changed in an instant. Gone was the wounded, heartbroken sister. In her place was something raw and venomous. You selfish bee. Before she could finish the sentence, Vanessa grabbed a glass of red wine from the nearest table and, with a snarl, hurled it directly at Madeline. The shock of cold liquid hit first, seeping through her silk dress, the deep red splattering across the ivory fabric. Then came the gasps, louder than before, rippling through the room like a tidal wave. Madeline did not move. She stood there, drenched but completely still. Vanessa was panting, eyes wild with rage, as if she had finally lost control of the mask she had been wearing all night. Madeline took a deep breath. She could still feel the sting of the wine against her skin, the weight of the eyes watching, waiting for her reaction. And then, she smiled. Not a pleasant smile. Not a forgiving smile. A smile of realization. She had spent her whole life believing she owed them something. That their love was conditional, transactional, something she had to earn by sacrificing herself over and over again. But this moment? This was the proof she needed. They didn't love her. They only loved what they could take from her. And they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Madeline slowly reached up, wiped a drop of wine from her chin, and let it fall to the ground. Then she turned toward Jonathan, ignoring the chaos behind her. "I think this party's over," she said smoothly, unshaken. And with that, she walked out, leaving everything, her ruined dress, her family's shocked faces, their carefully laid trap, behind her. If you loved this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Your support inspires us to bring you more heartwarming stories almost every day. Thank you for being part of our community. See you in the next one. Madeline Brooks walked out of that ballroom with her head held high, but the moment she stepped into the cold night air, a deep tremor ran through her body. It wasn't from the chill. It was from the realization that she had just burned the last bridge to her family. Or at least, that's what she thought. Because they weren't done with her. Not even close. The first signs of retaliation started the very next morning. Her phone buzzed relentlessly, calls, voicemails, messages, each one a fresh knife aimed at her conscience. From her father. "I never thought I'd raise a daughter so heartless. You embarrassed us in front of everyone. You humiliated your own mother. Do you have any idea what you've done?" From her mother. "Maddie, please, we're family. Families don't turn their backs on each other. You can still fix this. Just send something to help Vanessa get through this rough time. If not for her, at least for the kids." From Vanessa. "You smug little witch. Do you feel good about yourself? Watching your own family suffer while you sit in your high-rise office, counting your money? You've always been jealous of me. Admit it. You just wanted to see me fail." The messages didn't stop. Every hour, a new wave of guilt, threats, and emotional blackmail poured in. Then came the extended family, uncles, aunts, cousins, people she hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly crawling out of the woodwork, all with opinions. "She's changed." Money went to her head. Who turns their back on their own blood? Madeline ignored them. Deleted the messages. Blocked numbers. But then, things escalated. At work, whispers started to spread. She caught the looks. The hushed conversations that stopped the moment she entered a room. People who had congratulated her just days ago were now watching her differently. Her assistant, Olivia, hesitated before knocking on her office door. "Ma'am," she said, voice careful, you might want to see this." She placed a tablet in front of Madeline. It was a Facebook post. From her father. A long, dramatic account of how his successful daughter had abandoned her struggling family, refused to help her sister, and publicly shamed them in front of their peers. The comments were vicious. Disgusting. Ungrateful brat. Some people forget where they came from. And worst of all, some were from her colleagues. Madeline felt the rage rise, but she forced herself to stay still. This was what they wanted. To break her. To force her to crawl back and beg for forgiveness. She wouldn't. But she had underestimated just how far they were willing to go. The real attack came 2 nights later. She had stayed late at the office, trying to bury herself in work, to shut out the noise, when she stepped into the parking garage and immediately felt it. That strange, prickling awareness that someone was watching her. Her steps slowed. She glanced around. The garage was nearly empty, just a few dim lights flickering overhead. Then, a movement in the shadows. Her pulse spiked. She wasn't alone. Her grip tightened around her keys, the sharp end pressing between her fingers. Then, a figure stepped into the light. Vanessa. But she wasn't alone. 2 men, big, rough-looking, guys Madeline didn't recognize, stood beside her sister. Madeline's stomach dropped. Vanessa smiled, but it wasn't the sweet, broken act from the ballroom. This was something else. Something ugly. "Hey, sis," Vanessa purred. "You've been ignoring me." Madeline's heart pounded, but she didn't flinch. "I don't have anything to say to you," she said, voice cold. Vanessa's smile widened. "Oh, I think you do." She gestured lazily to the 2 men. "Meet my friends. They're very interested in having a little chat." One of the men cracked his knuckles. The other just stared, expression unreadable. Madeline forced herself to stay calm. This was Vanessa. Her sister. She wouldn't actually. Would she? Madeline took a slow breath. You're making a mistake. Vanessa tilted her head. No, Maddie. You did. When you turned your back on me. Then, she nodded at the men. The taller one moved first, stepping forward with clear intent. Madeline acted on instinct. She didn't run. She launched forward, ramming her elbow into the guy's ribs before he could grab her. He let out a grunt of surprise, but she didn't stop. She turned, slamming her briefcase across his face, sending him stumbling back. The other one cursed and lunged for her, but she was faster. She dodged, twisting away just in time, her body moving on sheer adrenaline. Vanessa screamed. What the hell are you doing? Grab her. Madeline reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. With one tap, she activated the emergency alarm, a sharp, deafening siren that echoed through the garage. The men froze. Vanessa's eyes went wide. Oh, you little. Before she could finish, tires screeched from the entrance. Security. The two men bolted. Vanessa hesitated for half a second, then ran after them, cursing under her breath. Madeline stood there, chest heaving, body tense with adrenaline. This wasn't just manipulation anymore. This was an attack. And Vanessa, her own sister, had orchestrated it. That was the moment Madeline knew. They weren't going to stop. And if they wanted a war, they were about to get one. The morning air was crisp as Madeline Brooke stepped out of the cab in front of Carter and Rowe, one of the most feared litigation firms in the city. She had spent the last 2 nights digging through every account, every legal document, every piece of financial history linked to her name. And what she found was more than just manipulation. It was a deliberate, calculated betrayal. Her parents had forged her signature on a $120,000 loan. The money was funneled into accounts controlled by Gregory and Diane Brooks, and a large chunk of it had gone directly to Vanessa. But that wasn't all. There was a property deed, a townhouse purchased under her name, though she had never seen it, never signed for it. And the final blow? A legal document her father had drawn up, transferring all financial liabilities to her in the event of their unfortunate passing. They had never seen her as their daughter. They had seen her as a walking trust fund, a backup plan, a safety net. And now they had made the biggest mistake of their lives. Inside the law office, Madeline sat across from Ethan Carter, the firm's senior partner. He flipped through the file she had sent ahead, his expression darkening with each passing page. This isn't just fraud, he said, his voice low and measured. This is a full-scale financial scheme. We're looking at identity theft, real estate fraud, and wire fraud. He set the file down, meeting her gaze. Miss Brooks, if you want to press charges, we can have a lawsuit filed by the end of the week. But once we do this, there's no going back. Madeline didn't hesitate. Do it. Within 48 hours, the lawsuit was in motion. Ethan and his team moved quickly, freezing her parents' accounts, alerting the bank, and securing a court order to seize any assets tied to the fraudulent transactions. Gregory and Diane woke up to find their finances in shambles. Vanessa, who had been living off stolen money, was suddenly drowning in debt she could no longer hide from. Then, the news broke. It started small, a whisper through social circles, concerned questions from distant relatives. But soon, the story spread beyond just their inner circle. The Brooks family's darkest secrets were no longer hidden. Gregory and Diane weren't victims of an ungrateful daughter, they were criminals, and everyone knew it. Madeline expected anger. She expected denial. What she didn't expect was how quickly they crumbled. Vanessa was the first to call. Sobbing. Begging. They're taking my house, Maddie, she wailed through the phone. I didn't know about the loan. Dad told me it was just temporary. You have to stop this. Madeline's grip on the phone tightened. Did you stop when you tried to have me cornered in a parking lot? She asked, her voice as cold as steel. Silence. Then, a weak, trembling whisper. I didn't mean. Madeline hung up. There was no room for forgiveness. Not this time. By the end of the week, Gregory and Diane were facing felony charges. Their accounts had been drained, their home was under foreclosure, and their once flawless reputation had collapsed under the weight of their own greed. Vanessa was left with nothing, forced to face the reality of her own selfishness. The courtroom was silent when Gregory finally faced Madeline, his face lined with rage, exhaustion, and disbelief. "You ruined this family," he spat, his voice thick with hatred. Madeline smiled. "No," she said, standing tall. "I just finally stopped letting you ruin me." And with that, she turned and walked out, leaving them behind for good. For the first time in her life, she was free. The courtroom doors swung shut behind Madeline Brooks, but her father's final words still echoed in her mind. "You ruined this family." Once, those words would have cut deep, left her shaken, maybe even guilt-ridden enough to turn back. But now? Now, they were nothing more than the last desperate cry of a man who had lost everything. She stepped outside into the crisp autumn air and breathed freely for what felt like the first time in her life. The weight she had carried for years, the guilt, the obligation, the endless cycle of being their financial crutch, was gone. They had tried to break her, to trap her in their web of manipulation, and when that failed, they had turned violent, desperate to keep her under their control. But they had underestimated her strength, and now they were the ones left picking up the pieces of their shattered lives. And Madeline? She was finally free. The fallout was swift and brutal. Her mother, Diane, tried to salvage what little dignity she had left, spinning her own version of events to friends, neighbors, and anyone who would listen. She claimed it had all been a misunderstanding, that Madeline had overreacted, and that the family had simply been going through a rough time. But no amount of crocodile tears could undo the cold, hard facts. The fraudulent documents, the stolen money, the real estate scheme, every detail had been laid bare in court. There was no more hiding, no more manipulating, no more playing the helpless mother in need of her daughter's love and support. Gregory Brooks, the once respected family patriarch, fared even worse. His accounts were frozen, his assets seized, and his carefully crafted reputation lay in ruins. His business associates refused to take his calls. His old friends stopped returning messages. He had spent his whole life controlling the people around him, believing that power, wealth, and status were things he could wield like a weapon. But now he had nothing. And Vanessa? She collapsed completely. The townhouse, the one bought with stolen money, was repossessed. Her luxury car was towed away in the middle of the night. Creditors came knocking, demanding payment she could no longer avoid. For years, Vanessa had been shielded from the consequences of her own actions, relying on Madeline's success, their parents' schemes, and a lifetime of manipulation to keep herself afloat. Now, with nowhere left to turn, she was drowning. She called Madeline once. It wasn't the angry, hateful Vanessa she had come to expect. It was a broken, panicked voice, barely above a whisper. "Please, Maddie. I have nowhere else to go." Madeline listened. Then she hung up. She wasn't cruel. But she had learned. Some people don't change. And some people don't deserve a second chance. Madeline didn't look back. She packed her things, left the city, and didn't tell a soul where she was going. There was nothing left for her there, not the family who had used her, not the past that had weighed her down for so long. She had spent her whole life working, sacrificing, proving herself for what? For people who never saw her as anything more than a paycheck? Not anymore. Now, she was choosing herself. A few weeks later, she stood on the balcony of her new apartment, miles away from the city she once called home. The air was crisp, fresh, untouched by the past. For the first time in her life, she wasn't looking over her shoulder, waiting for the next demand, the next guilt trip, the next way they would try to pull her back in. She had won. She had taken back everything they tried to steal from her. Her future, her freedom, herself. And as she stood there, taking in the view, a small smile played at her lips. For the first time, she wasn't running from anything. She was finally completely free. Madeline's story is more than just a tale of betrayal and revenge. It's a wake-up call. It highlights a harsh reality that many people face. Not all families are built on love and support. Some are built on control, manipulation, and entitlement. Her journey teaches us that self-sacrifice should have limits. Too often, society tells us that family comes first, no matter what. But what happens when family becomes toxic? When they see you as a resource, not a person. Madeline's decision to break free wasn't selfish, it was necessary. In today's world, many people find themselves trapped in cycles of obligation, pressured to support relatives who refuse to take responsibility for their own actions. Financial abuse within families is real and damaging, and breaking away from it takes courage, strength, and self-respect. Her story reminds us that we don't owe anyone our success, especially not those who tried to sabotage us. Choosing yourself isn't betrayal, it's survival. And sometimes, the only way to truly be free is to walk away and never look back.